Hello, random person who took a shot at this video. For what it's worth, I appreciate you taking the time to watch it. I guess I'll just get right into it. What I wanted to talk about today was the power of sound effects in video games. I'm talking this, this, and especially this. I feel like sound effects go largely unnoticed in most people's gaming experience, even though personally, I believe that they're one of the biggest drivers of immersion. Everybody loves a good sound effect. The kind that you can hear over and over again and never get tired of. Outside of basic satisfaction, however, they serve a greater purpose in games as a whole, going so far as to vastly improve the experience of some games. Sometimes the sound effect is so good, you immediately know what it is, which is especially impressive considering that you probably haven't left your sweaty gamer chair in 3 months while you've been obsessing over your newest addiction. There's an ambient soundscape that adds to a way a game feels, but besides that, there's also a technical gameplay aspect to sound effects that I feel like is so intuitive it goes over our dopamine junkie gamer heads. To start off, I want to talk a bit about the importance of sound in games where the action is super quick, that impactful animations are more of a hindrance than a benefit. I'm talking the realms of like shooters and high speed action games, the kind of games where that sweet, sweet gamer dopamine is coming from the high octane or high stress gameplay. These kinds of games are forced to create impact outside of animation and instead in the realm of sound design. If I'm playing Valorant and they add some kind of really cool animation for climbing a wall, let's say, but it's a little bit excessive and it takes like 5 seconds, I'm gonna think it's really cool until I receive a high speed lead injection while I'm doing the world's most average pull up. Then, every time that animation plays, I'm going to want to rip my eyes out the way that Uma Thurman did to that one guy in Kill Bill. This creates a bit of a dilemma for designers because in traditional animation, there's a way that impact is accentuated by warping time just before the moment of impact or just after. But this is something you can't really get away with in most first person or high speed games. Since we can't have this, the developers are forced to create that impact through sound design. Developers are really forced to hone in on the small things. I think that Doom is a great example of this. This game is super fast paced. There's a ton going on at any given moment. And even inside of this super fast and high speed gameplay, they have these moments or animations for executions that don't detract from that speed. I'm talking 5 seconds of tearing some poor demonic fetus into slabs of hell meat before shoving 2 shells of buckshot into the next poor soulless creature. One of the ways that Doom manages to make these animations super impactful despite their brevity is that sweet, satisfying sound of rending flesh and viscera. Not all games manage to have this kind of animation in combat, though, and so most shooters or first person games are forced to create this impact through the sound design itself. The fidelity of the footsteps, the quality of the sound the gun makes. This is one of the things that really makes certain shooters stick out to me, and it's one of the things that I think made Bungie really stick out with the old Halo games and how they kind of continued to do so with the release of Destiny. If every sound in your game blends together, all of them the same bland retexturing of the same chunky gunshot sound, you lose a lot of the nuance that's available through intentional sound design. Sure, in real life, there's not a ton of auditory difference between most gunshot sounds, aside from mostly the caliber of the bullet and somewhat the way that the gas is released from the chamber. But a game isn't real life. There's a lot more opportunity for intentional sound design in a video game. I should be able to tell what's being shot at me or what I'm shooting based on audio signals alone. On top of this, there is satisfaction for the player when a sound is predictable but still nuanced enough that you can tell the difference. When big gun with big bullet make big bass sound, my primate brain goes like this. If the big gun doesn't rattle my brain in my skull with the amount of bass that's playing, I'm going to be a little bit disappointed. Same goes for other styles of combat too. I want my sword to have that steel ring to scrape against its sheath. I want my small, fast-firing gun to rain a metallic clatter on the ground with all the shells it's vomiting. I want my mech to feel heavy with the bass of its footsteps on the ground. I want to hear the mechanical whir of the joints, the sliding of panels. I want to hear the gear-like spooling and mechanical whir of my minigun. This is the make or break immersion that I feel like is really lost in some games. Not that they don't try per se, but it's just not enough. The sounds aren't varied enough or are too basic. This facet of game design, I feel like, goes unnoticed too often. Many studios use pre-made samples instead of making their own, or they spend too long trying to make them hyper-realistic when they could make them unrealistic in a fun way. Like if the sound was hyper realistic, I'd be fucking deaf after 30 seconds of gameplay. I'd be bleeding out of my ears after like 20 minutes of Valorant. Silencers don't actually make that sound. They actually make this sound, which, let's be real, everybody wants to hear the and not this. Now, obviously, I understand that mixing sounds is difficult and time consuming and requires expensive equipment and a professional. But if an indie developer can make all 3,000 guns in Enter the Gungeon sound somewhat different and unique and fun, then why can't a AAA developer make all of the sounds in their game anything other than fucking boring? Like some team of 8 people forced one guy to teach himself how to do sound design and he made 3,000 gun sounds in a fit of manic passion. While Call of Duty has 3,000 developers and a $300 million budget and they have 10 gunshot sounds. But let's be real, I guess you can't force passion out of your employees when you require that they work 80-hour weeks and crunch for months at a time. But I just want to make sure I say that there are some AAA developers that put that level of attention to the sound design in their game. Like Naughty Dog in Uncharted 4 is a great example. There's a different sound for footsteps on fucking everything, on dust, dirt, rock, gravel. Hell, they added those sound differences for the tires on the Jeep too, and you use it for like 40 minutes of gameplay. Fuck, if that was the standard for sound design in games, it would be like 200 gigabytes of uncompressed audio. Outside of immersion and impact though, I think that there's one other facet of sound design that's really important. Dopamine. Developers better target my ape brain with some Pavlov's Bell dopamine shots if they want me to continue to play their game. If opening a chest, getting loot, or even dropping skins doesn't hit like the jackpot on a slot machine, then I don't even want to play your game. A fantastic example of this, I think, is Vampire Survivors. This game is remarkably simple. In fact, you only have control over your character in 2 ways. You move on a 2D plane, and you select your loot. That's it. And yet this game manages to keep my attention for 30 minutes of WASD and menus. I found out why later, and that's because the developer used to design slot machines. He used the same techniques that get gambling addicts to piss themselves just so they don't lose a slot machine to keep low attention span gamers in their crusty chairs for 30 minutes. And you know what? It fucking works. Every time I open a chest in that game, there are like 10 possible options of loot. But god damn it if my dopamine receptors aren't going for the whole 5 seconds the animation is playing. OG Zelda games kind of did the same thing. There's a reason why that sound effect of opening a chest lives rent-free in your brain 10 years later. On a side note, no wonder people are addicted to games. Feel-good chemicals straight to the dome all the time. To be completely honest, gameplay is the true driver of a fun game. Sometimes a game has stellar gameplay and mediocre sound, and I find myself not caring just because of how much fun I'm having. This isn't the norm, though. Forcing your gameplay to carry mediocre sound really puts an extra strain on that gameplay, and not everybody can make something that fun. Hell, gold in Diablo 4 is basically useless, and yet I pick up every goddamn shilling, fishing it out of pools of blood and gore, polishing it off with my shirt and sticking it in my pocket. Hell, but sometimes my character is also picking them out of literal entrails in the game just for that fucking 5 gold. Hell, I've probably wasted a minimum of like 2 or 3 hours backtracking for gold, and I've loved every fucking second of it. Risk of Rain 2 bases its entire gameplay loop on opening chests, and yet despite opening thousands, I will never get tired of this sound. That's the huge gameplay changing aspect of sound design. If I can remember the sound from your game 10 years later, like the Zelda chest opening sound, or if you can use the same sound effect 5 years later just to trigger my nostalgia dopamine receptors, you're doing it right. And every time I enjoy one of those really basic ambient sounds in a game that tries to be realistic and does, like Red Dead, I thank God for the poor schmuck who spent 40-hour weeks slaving over the sound of a drawer opening or a door creaking open. Imagine that guy sitting in front of his computer for 40-hour weeks honing in on this. Hats off to that guy. Your dwindling sanity brought me joy for like 4 whole seconds. Now, obviously, there are more facets to sound design in games, like music and good voice acting. but I decided to focus on sound effects because those other two things are things that we always talk about. For what it's worth, thank you if you made it all the way to the end of this. I spent a good amount of time writing this script and hoping that at least somebody would be interested in it. Thank you for listening to my dumbass hyperfixate on this sound. And this one. And this one. Let me know about a sound effect that takes up RAM in your brain. Thanks for watching.